Shout on, pray on, we're gaining ground. Glory, hallelujah, the dead's alive and the lost is found. Glory, hallelujah.
PatriarchCigars.com.
SquirrelyJoes.com.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Jacob Glass, and welcome back to another episode of the Millennial Medic here on Eschatology Matters, part of the Fight Laugh Feast Network. So today is finally the day, Daniel chapter 5. So I have been working really hard on understanding this chapter so that I could present it to you, which led me to have a couple really awesome interviews, and if you guys have not seen them, they will be such a help going along with this video. So I interviewed Bruce Gore and I interviewed Dr. Stephen D. Anderson, specifically over the book of Daniel and a lot about Daniel chapter 5, a lot of the characters, the chronology. So if you have not seen them, please, please, please go back and check those out. So today is finally my day to present what I feel like is the best presentation of Daniel chapter 5. So I hope you guys enjoy. Hope you guys can keep up. It is going to be a long one. I don't know if I'm going to split it up or not. Let's see if you guys can hang in here for, as long as it takes. There is a lot of info, a lot of information that I want to put in here that I do find to be really important to understand the whole view of what was going on in this chapter. So without further ado, here we go. Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. All right. So, verse 1, Belshazzar. All right. Who is Belshazzar? So this is actually, and has been for a long time, a pretty controversial figure, just due to what the secular scholars had believed for a very long time, as well as some of the verbiage that's used in the book of Daniel. As we'll go on to see, right there in Daniel, it says that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, right? So is Belshazzar the son of Nebuchadnezzar? Well, let's take a look at who Belshazzar is. So Belshazzar was a Babylonian crown prince and co-regent and king from about 553 to 539. So for the longest time, secular scholars didn't believe that Belshazzar even existed. So in 1854, a man named J.E. Taylor actually found 4 clay cylinders while he was excavating a ziggurat in Ur. And they mention Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar. They're known as the Nabonidus cylinders. So until then, they didn't believe he existed, but now, since then, right, since we have this information of him existing, we've actually found thousands more that mention Nabonidus, and a lot of them mention his son Belshazzar. So we don't really have the secular scholars debating Belshazzar's existence anymore. So what we find, like I said, is he's this crown prince, co-regent king. And he actually ruled alongside his father, Nabonidus, who was the king overall, who ruled from about 556 to 539. So the way that Belshazzar became king or became in charge of Babylon is that his father left to the area of Tama in Arabia from about 553 to 542. That's why we see the difference in dates here. So Nabonidus took over in 556, and Belshazzar started ruling in 553. Well, that's precisely when Nabonidus left to go to Tama. And he was a large devotee to this moon god Sin. So he was believed to potentially be going to set up different temples and stuff in her honor. So they actually think this ziggurat where they found the Nabonidus cylinders was potentially a temple to the moon god seen. The reason they think that is because these cylinders were a part of the foundation texts of the ziggurat. So, again, Nabonidus is the father of Belshazzar, is this extra biblical evidence is pointing to that. So why else do we think that? So like I said, Nebuchadnezzar, your father, it's mentioned in verse 2, verse 11, verse 18. So is this a situation where the Bible is right and the secular lineage is wrong? Or is it the secular lineage is correct and the Bible is just talking about something else? So maybe there's a difference between what your father actually means. And I think that is precisely the case. So your father here in the book of Daniel is most likely referencing just simply your predecessor. The other option is, we'll see here soon, is that Nebuchadnezzar was potentially Belshazzar's grandfather. So let me explain a little bit of that to you. So just going over the basic kings list, and you can see this in the Uruk king list, Nebuchadnezzar, his son Amel-Marduk, or Evil Merodach, he was disposed by his brother-in-law, Nerigal-Isar. Nerigal-Isar had a son named Labashi-Marduk, and Labashi-Marduk was killed and assassinated in a coup that involved Nabonidus and Belshazzar. So if we actually look over in this picture over here, hopefully you guys can see my cursor, we see Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar was the father of Nebuchadnezzar. Right under here you have Nebuchadnezzar, then you have Amel-Marduk, Nerigal-Isar, Labashi-Marduk, and then Nabonidus. So another reason for the controversy about Belshazzar is he's not mentioned in this Uruk king list. So that's one of the large reasons they thought he didn't exist. But like I said, we have Nabonidus cylinders and quite a bit of other info that mention Belshazzar, Nabonidus' son. So let's continue. Let's talk a little bit about all of these descendants of, well, not all of the descendants, but the succession of kings after Nebuchadnezzar. So we'll start with Amel-Marduk. So Amel-Marduk, or Evil Merodach, was Nebuchadnezzar's son, and he ruled from 562 to 560, so only a couple years. He was disposed and murdered by his brother-in-law, Nerigal-Isar. So Nerigal-Isar was married to one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. So Evil Merodach is actually mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 25, verses 27 through 30. So let me go ahead and read this to you. There is hopefully not too many words I don't know how to say. So, now it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, so we see that he was a king, in the year that he became king, released Jehoiachin of Judah from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given to him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. So we see there that there was a king, Evil Merodach of Babylon. But this is the only area where he's mentioned. So it gets kind of confusing with if you were to look at Daniel as like a chronological succession of kings, it's going to confuse you. Not only that, but you can see in the following chapters in Daniel as we get to them, it'll bounce between Belshazzar and Darius and Cyrus. It'll go back and forth between these characters, so we know it's not written chronologically. So this is just, again, with the book of Daniel, we just don't have anything going on that we know of that is revelation that happened during Evil Merodach's reign in Babylon. So, like we said, he is disposed and murdered by his brother-in-law, Nerigal-Isar. So let's look at Nerigal-Isar. So he was a businessman and landowner who possibly helped Nebuchadnezzar build the Median Wall of Babylon. He was an officer in the rank of Rabmag, may have been, and this is where it's going to get really hard to say these names, so don't judge me too much, Nergal-Sar-Ezer, mentioned in Jeremiah 39:13. So he may have been this character. So what it says is that Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, sent word along with Nebuchadnezzar, Shazban, the Rabsaris, and Nergal Sarezer, the Rabmog, and all the leading officers of the king of Babylon. So there's a lot of scholars who think that this character may have been just a variant spelling of Nergal. So take that for what you will. But they think the daughter he may have married was Nebuchadnezzar's oldest daughter, Kashaya. And he, like I said, disposed and murdered Amel-Marduk, or Evil Merodach, and he ruled from 560 to 556. So, again, not very long reign, just about 4 years. So his son, Labashi-Marduk, was really young when he took the throne. He began to rule in about 556, and he only ruled 1 to 3 months, and he was assassinated in the coup that involved both Nabonidus and Belshazzar. Besides that, we really don't know much besides a little bit from Berosus, who says that the reason he may have been plotted against was because of his evil ways. So we know that all we know about this is he was a pretty evil young man that nobody wanted him to rule. So continuing on, Nabonidus takes over from this point. So Nabonidus is a really large character in Babylonian history. He received the kingdom through a coup. He ruled from 556 to 539, like we already mentioned. He was gone to Tema and Arabia, and he left Belshazzar to rule in his absence. So according to Herodotus, Nabonidus married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar named Nitocris. You also see it in the writings of Doherty. In about the 20s, he wrote a book dealing with this, the Queen Mother. So if it's true, Nitocris would have been the mother of Belshazzar and may have been that queen that's going to be mentioned here in Daniel 5:10. So pretty much what I'm getting at here is it seems that we have quite a bit of evidence that shows that Nebuchadnezzar was not Belshazzar's legitimate father. But father was used in potentially two different ways. One, it could have been used to simply mean predecessor. And the other, if this is true that Nitocris is the wife of Nabonidus and the mother of Belshazzar, father could have meant grandfather. So again, take it for what you will on the grandfather part. But we have seen, the word father used to mean predecessor in other places as well. So I think that's good enough, and it suffices enough, because the extra biblical evidence that we have to show that Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar and all that lineage I showed you, it's pretty extensive. So the other point here is that in the passage, Belshazzar throws this great feast, right? He's wanting to feast, and he tells them to go and get the vessels that were in the temple that Nebuchadnezzar brought over in the exile. So we see that actually back in Daniel 1:1, that when it's the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged it, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and that Nebuchadnezzar carried them into the land of Shinar, into the house of his God, and the vessels he took and put in the treasury of his God. So that's Daniel 1. So this feast, so it's described in verses 1 through 4 as an, I'm going to take this quote from Dr. Stephen D. Anderson, who I had the interview with, so please go back and watch it. This is from his interpretive guide to the major prophets. He said, the feast itself, described in Daniel 5:1 through 4, as an immoral and debauched event which was convened to honor pagan gods. Both Xenophon and Herodotus state that the Persians attacked on the night of one of the great feasts of the Babylonian religion, so as to catch the Babylonians off guard. If the Nabonidus Chronicle is correct in dating the fall of Babylon to the 16th of Tishri, then this festival would have been the Akitu festival associated with the cult of Sin at Haran, which Nabonidus had attempted to impose upon Babylon. This festival started on the 17th of Tishri, since the day was reckoned to begin in the evening. The festival apparently began after sundown on the 16th, when the Medes and the Persians attacked. We also have Xenophon. He said, "Then when he heard that a certain festival had come round in Babylon, during which all Babylon was accustomed to drink and revel all night long, Cyrus took a large number of men just as soon as it was dark and opened up the heads of the trenches of the river." And then we have Herodotus. "The Persians made their way into Babylon by the channel of the Euphrates. All this time the Babylonians were dancing and making merry at a festival which chanced to be toward, till they learnt the truth but too well." So the reason I put this in here, so I kind of jumped ahead here, is that we have extra biblical evidence to prove the passage in Daniel that Belshazzar threw a great feast, and we'll see that night he ends up dying in the siege of Babylon. So both Xenophon and Herodotus attest to this. So they were historians. So Xenophon says that they were having a feast and reveling all night long, and as soon as it was dark, Cyrus went in through the river. So does Herodotus, saying that they were making merry at a festival, and they opened up the channels of the Euphrates. So kind of a history here. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, and you can hear about it in both of the interviews I did with both Bruce Gore and Dr. Stephen D. Anderson, is that the way Cyrus ends up taking the city is that while they were feasting, while they were drunk and reveling all night long, Cyrus was a genius of a military leader. So the Babylonians thought they were safe inside the wall. The way that Babylon was set up is that the Euphrates ran right through the city of Babylon. So what Cyrus did is they diverted the Euphrates and lowered the level of the river so that they could walk right through and under the wall and take the city. So while they were partying, thinking that they were completely safe in there, Cyrus sacked the city. So it's pretty amazing. So temple vessels that are mentioned in verses 2 through 3. So I wanted to kind of detail maybe what some of those might have been. You can see it in Ezra 1, verses 7 through 11. It says, "Also King Cyrus brought out the articles of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and put in the house of his gods. And Cyrus, king of Persia, had them brought out by the hand of the Mithridath, the treasurer, and he counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Now this was their number: 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, 29 duplicates, 30 gold bowls, 410 silver bowls of a second kind, and 1,000 other articles. All the articles of gold and silver numbered 5,400. Sheshbazzar brought them all up with the exiles who went up from Babylon to Jerusalem." So just a little idea of, you were wondering what the temple vessels may have been like. Clearly we know it had something to do with them being able to drink wine out of, due to the verse here in Daniel. And then just the idolatry, right? Verses 2 through 4 describe how not only were they defacing the temple vessels by using them, but they were also worshiping the gods of iron and gold and silver and stone and wood, all of that. So those gods could have included, the most prominent was Marduk or Bel. So you can see that a lot in the names, even Amel Marduk or Labashi Marduk. We also see the moon god Sin or Aku, Shamash, Nebu, Ishtar, and Adad. Continuing on. Suddenly the fingers of a human hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face became pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints loosened, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring in the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king began speaking and said to the wise men of Babylon, "Anyone who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck. and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscriptions or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his face grew even more pale, and his nobles were perplexed. So this is one of the other large evidences of the co-regency of Belshazzar and Nabonidus. So though Belshazzar was considered a king, he was in reality serving as a co-regent or a co-king and was still subservient ultimately to his father Nabonidus, who would have been first in the kingdom. So when you see that he's offering this third in the kingdom, it's not that he just didn't want to give second away. It's because he was second in the kingdom. So the highest honor he could give to anybody was to make them third in the kingdom. So it's just another evidence that kind of really supports that idea of the co-regency, also supports the idea of his father Nabonidus being king during this time as well. So we go into verses 10 through 12. The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles, and the queen began to speak and said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the soothsayers, sorcerers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because of an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of riddles, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation." So, like we've already dealt with, the Nebuchadnezzar, your father passage, most likely referencing predecessor and or potentially grandfather. And this is where the queen actually comes in. Like I said, it was likely that it was Nitocris, daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, wife of Nabonidus, and the mother of Belshazzar. She recalls Daniel's deeds amongst amongst Nebuchadnezzar. So it kind of gives the idea that if this would have been the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, she would have been probably intricately familiar with all the things that Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel had been through. The dreams, Daniel's interpretation of those. So it's not just a random woman. She was intricately connected in some way. Verses 13 through 16. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king began speaking and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? Now I have heard about you, that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now the wise men and sorcerers were brought in before me to read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you are able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with a purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as third ruler in the kingdom." Continuing on, then Daniel replied and said before the king, "Keep your gifts for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, greatness, honor, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Now, because of the greatness which he granted him, all the peoples, nations, and populations of all languages trembled and feared in his presence. Whomever he wished, he killed. Whomever he wished, he spared alive. Whomever he wished, he elevated. And whoever he wished, he humbled. But when his heart was arrogant, and his spirit became so overbearing that he behaved presumptuously, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his dignity was taken away from him. He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of animals. And his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. But you have risen up against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you. And you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine out of them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, nor hear, nor understand, but the God in whose hand are your life breath, and all your ways you have not glorified. Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out. Pretty powerful. So one of the things is that Daniel has no concern for gifts. He's not doing this to earn anything, and that's pretty common of Daniel that we see throughout the passages, is that the other times he really didn't care for the gifts. He really didn't take any credit for any of the interpretations, that he gives the glory to God. He knows from whom the interpretation is ultimately coming from. And he doesn't want them. He doesn't want any of the gifts from Belshazzar. So he goes to tell him that God had granted sovereignty, greatness, honor, majesty to his father, Nebuchadnezzar. So he goes on to recount that story. So that story that was in Daniel chapter 4. So when Nebuchadnezzar came out and said, "Look at this great kingdom," and God humbled him, drove him wild like a beast. So one of the things is that Nebuchadnezzar was humbled until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. So again, like we've been talking in almost every single chapter we've done so far, is this main message of God's sovereignty over everything, even kings and kingdoms. So he's preaching this to Belshazzar, trying to get him to understand that his father was only, Nebuchadnezzar, right, his father, you know how I mean that now, was only in the position, was only as mighty as he was because God put him there, and God could easily take him out, and that he is saying the same thing to him. So it goes on to say, "Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew this." So Belshazzar must have known the stories of Nebuchadnezzar and how he was brought low. This would have been even more believable if the theory that Nitocris was truly the queen and was his mother and was Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. If this was Belshazzar's grandfather, he would have been probably very aware of all of the stuff that happened to his grandfather. But besides that, we have, even though you knew all this. So it is quite a spit in God's face, for lack of better words, to know exactly what happened to that mighty king, and that he, Belshazzar, who's not near as mighty as Nebuchadnezzar was, doing the similar things that Nebuchadnezzar did that got him brought so low. Goes on to say, "You praise the gods of gold and silver and bronze, which you do not hear, but God in whose hand are your life breath, and all your ways you have not glorified." It just made me think, it's like praising food and not the cook, or praising art and not the artist. It is just a thing, and we see this all throughout Scripture. Isaiah, talks about the dead, deaf, dumb idols, right? So it's a very similar thing, that God is setting himself up over all of the false gods. And then we get to the recognition that this hand was directly sent from God himself. So getting to what it wrote. So now, this is the inscription that was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So, from my research, and people that I've listened to, one of those being, Bruce Gore, This was common language that Belshazzar and the people could have read. The words were common usage, the words were common, but the usage was what was kind of unfamiliar to them. So I found that they were most likely names of weights, such as like the Mene, the shekel, and the peraz. And Bruce Gore, in our conversation, had stated that it would have been similar to someone writing on the wall, dollar, dollar, nickel, quarter. Right? So we can understand that. We can see that. We can read that. We know what a dollar is. We know what a nickel is. We know what a quarter is. But we didn't know why those were written there. We wouldn't know either if somebody wrote it on our wall. So Daniel goes to interpret it. So this is the amazing thing about a lot of prophecy in Scripture. I say this almost every time, is let Scripture interpret Scripture. You don't have to go so far and make up these grand interpretations when Daniel interprets it for you. So what does Daniel say? Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. He said, Mene again, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. And Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So, before we move on here, just pointing that out, this, just like chapter 2's vision of the succession of kingdoms, this is appearing before our eyes, right? Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. The chest and arms of silver is the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. We'll go on later to find out that the legs and the thighs of bronze would be the Greeks, and then the legs of iron would be Rome. So this is one of those things that God has prophesied here to Belshazzar, that your kingdom is being divided between the Medes and the Persians. Then it says, Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as third ruler in the kingdom. That same night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom about the age of 62. So they clothed Daniel. He now had authority as third ruler in the kingdom. So even though Daniel didn't want it, Belshazzar still rewarded him, kept his word. What I think that should at least show us is that Belshazzar believed Daniel's interpretation to be true, right? He didn't give any of the other diviners or any of the other sorcerers these rewards, right? Because either they were wrong or either they had no idea. They weren't rewarded. But Daniel gives his interpretation. There seems to be some type of belief that Belshazzar knew that Daniel gave the correct interpretation, and he rewarded him. He kept his word. So that same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, is what it says in verse 30. So the prophecy was fulfilled that very night. So that's probably the quickest prophecy in Scripture. It happens almost instantaneously, which is pretty wild. He is slain by the Medes and the Persians, right? So we see that it was going to be divided, given to the Medes and the Persians. We see that Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom. So this is where we go to the extra biblical evidence, right? We already mentioned a little bit about Xenophon and Herodotus mentioning Cyrus taking the city. So, like I said, he diverted the Euphrates to enter the city. Excuse me. So from Xenophon, it says, Then, when he heard that a certain festival had come around in Babylon, during which all Babylon was accustomed to drink and revel all night long, Cyrus took a large number of men just as soon as it was dark and opened up the heads of the trenches of the river. We already read that. And then again from Herodotus, which we already read, the Persians made their way into Babylon by the channel of the Euphrates. All this time the Babylonians were dancing and making merry at a festival which chanced to be toward, till they learned the truth but too well. So they take the city that very night, just as Daniel had prophesied. Belshazzar is slain in the city. So according to both Daniel and Xenophon, a king, so this is extra biblical again. So we already know that Cyrus took the city, but they don't mention anything about a king being slain yet. But Daniel and Xenophon actually do mention a king that was killed that night. So this is Xenophon. And when Gadatas and his men saw the gates open, they dashed in pursuit of the others as they fled back into the palace. And dealing blows right and left, they came into the presence of the king, and they found him already risen with his dagger in his hand. And Gadatas and Gabarias and their followers overpowered him, and those about the king perished also. One where he had sought some shelter, another while he was running away, and another while actually trying to defend himself with whatever he could. So according to Daniel, it says that Belshazzar was slain. By name, Belshazzar, the king, was slain. Xenophon just says a king was slain. He says Gadatas and Gabarias, when they went in, the king had a dagger in his hand ready to fight, and they killed him, and they killed all the others even while they were running away. But Herodotus doesn't say anything about a king. So we get to who was killed, right? So I already mentioned Daniel says Belshazzar. I mentioned that Xenophon says a king. So was it Nabonidus or was it Belshazzar? Well, according to Berosus, as contained in the writings of Josephus, Nabonidus was not in Babylon the night it fell, but he had escaped to Borsippa, and when Cyrus caught up with him, he let him live out his days in a place called Carmania. So this is going to be that passage from Berosus that is in the writings of Josephus against Apion. So it says, but it came to pass in the 17th year of his, Nabonidus' reign, that Cyrus came out of Persia with a great army, and having subdued all the rest of his kingdom, he rushed upon Babylonia. And when Nabonidus learned of his attack, he met him with his army and joined battle, and was defeated in battle. And fleeing with a few troops, he was confined within the city of the Borsippians. Then Cyrus seized Babylon, and ordered the outer walls of the city to be torn down, because of the city had been very troublesome to him, and he seemed hard to conquer. He then marched against Borsippia to force Nabonidus to capitulate. But Nabonidus did not wait out the siege, but gave himself up. Cyrus at first treated him kindly, and giving a residence to him in Carmania, sent him out of Babylon. But Darius the king took away some of his province for himself. So Berosus talks about how Nabonidus was actually gone away from Babylon, that he fought with Cyrus but fled to the city of the Borsippians, and Cyrus ended up meeting up with him, and essentially after he surrendered, let him live his days in Carmania. So we have extra biblical evidence, again, to say there was a king who died in Babylon that night. Daniel says it by name as Belshazzar, and then also that Nabonidus was not there that night. So it could not have been Nabonidus, where for a long time, secular historians would have said Nabonidus had died in the city, because all they had from Xenophon, which said a king had died. So we're seeing here that Daniel actually is what kind of gives us a full picture. Xenophon says a king. Well, Berosus says Nabonidus wasn't even there. So who was that king? Daniel says it was Belshazzar. So again, like I'm just saying, it says, due to the co-regency between Belshazzar and Nabonidus, it was only logical to conclude that King Belshazzar was in the city the night of the siege and was slain, just as the book of Daniel claims, while King Nabonidus fought with Cyrus and escaped to Borsippa, eventually surrendered and lived out his days in Carmania. So now moving into what I found to be probably the most difficult aspect of Daniel chapter 5, and it's going to probably take the most amount of our time here. So I'm hoping you guys are enjoying this. I'm hoping you're with me. I know this is a lot, and I'm kind of trying to rush through it a little bit. It's only because there's so much info here. And like I said, you'll get so much more if you just go back and watch the interview with Bruce Gore and Dr. Stephen D. Anderson, because they're going to be able to say this a whole lot clearer, being a little bit more familiar with the topics, being Dr. Stephen D. Anderson, is just an expert scholar specifically on Darius the Mede. So who better to listen to than him? So please go back and watch that. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of about 62. That's what it says in verse 31. So who was Darius the Mede? So what we have is we have some requirements, right? Requirements from Scripture. 1, he was Median, hence the name Darius the Mede, right? He was 62 at the fall of Babylon. Again, verse 31, about age 62. He ruled between Belshazzar of Babylon and Cyrus the Persian. So we have detailed rule of Belshazzar. We know that night when Belshazzar was slain, that it says that Darius is the one who received the kingdom that night. After that, we end up seeing and knowing from extra-biblical sources that Cyrus eventually took the kingdom. So he had to have fallen between Belshazzar and Cyrus. And then the last part is that he needed to have lived long enough to partake in the events described in Daniel, such as the lion's den, such as the other prophecies that Daniel gives during his reign. So who are the common theories? And this is actually, before I go on, I totally forgot about this. I need to mention that I mistakenly identified him in my chapter 1 video. So if you go back and watch my chapter 1 video, you will see that I claimed him to be Gobryas. So that's who I thought it was. From the evidence that I had read at the time, I thought it was Gobryas. But you're about to see why I don't think it's Gobryas. So common theories, Gobryas, also called Gubaru or Ugbaru. Another theory is that he was Cyrus. And another theory is that he was Cyaxares II. So let's go through those. Let's talk about them and let's kind of see how they line up. So who was Gobryas, Ugbaru, or Gubaru? So it's who I used to think was Darius the Mede, which I do not think he was anymore. He's the governor of Gutium in Babylon. He defected and ended up leading the siege against Babylon. So we saw when we read that account of the two men that came in and found the king with his dagger in his hand, one of those guys was Gobryas. So he used to be on the side of the Babylonians. He was essentially Babylonian, right? Assyrian or Babylonian. So he defected and helped Cyrus with that siege. So maybe he taught them, where exactly they would have been that night. He seems to be somewhat instrumental in the fact that he was mentioned by Xenophon, as we see down here. So it says that Gadatas and Gobryas and their followers overpowered him with the king they found risen with a dagger in his hand. So what are the problems with Gobryas? Well, let's look at the identity requirements. He was Median. No, Gobryas was Assyrian/Babylonian. So he fails. He was not Median. Would not have made sense for Gobryas to change his name to Darius the Mede. He was not Median in any way. He was 62 at the fall of Babylon. Well, we don't really know. At least I have never found anything that details the age of Gobryas. So it's possible. He could have been 62. He ruled between Belshazzar of Babylon and Cyrus the Persian. Yep, that also could have been a possibility. He lived long enough to partake in the events described in Daniel, such as the lion's den. This is where another large failure came in, and this is probably the most convincing for me, is why I don't think that Gobryas fits the mold. So the Nabonidus Chronicle states that Gobryas died approximately 25 days after the fall of Babylon. So there was a man, Roger C. Young, so he also was really helpful in my understanding of the context of Daniel chapter 5. I had a good phone call with him. He has quite a bit of good articles if you look him up, Roger C. Young. So this is a quote he said. He said, "The Babylonian Chronicle relates that Ugbaru, Xenophon's Gobryas, was instrumental as a commander under Cyrus in the taking of Babylon on Tishri 16 or October 12th, 539 BC, but that he died 25 days later on the 11th of Heshvan or November 6th. Daniel's Darius, however, must have been on the throne on Nisan 1 or March 24th of 538 BC in order for him to have year 1 assigned to him in Daniel 9:1. So we mentioned this a little bit before about the years of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. There was some a lot of scholars have realized the way that they dated things would have been they needed to get to the next year to claim the year. So the year in which they generally took over would have still been the year of the former king. So, for example, with Nebuchadnezzar, his father Nabopolassar would have essentially still been one of his years of reign the first year Nebuchadnezzar took over. So the same with Belshazzar and Darius the Mede. So 539 would still have been looked at as the year of Belshazzar. So he needed to get to 538 in order to have in the first year of the reign of Darius the Mede. And that's what Daniel 9:1 says. So he's saying that would have had to get to about March 24th to get to Nisan 1, which would have been 538 BC, but he had already died back on the 11th of Heshvan or November 6th. So it would have really only been about 25 days after the fall of Babylon. So he can't have lived long enough to do anything that the Darius the Mede in Scripture would have done. It just doesn't make sense. We have pretty clear evidence of when he died according to the Nabonidus Chronicle. So we have the results of 0 out of 4 passes and a possible 2 out of 4 if we're being a little bit more generous. So, second theory, Cyrus the Great. So, some people think that there was a throne name for Cyrus, Darius the Mede. All right, so that Cyrus took on that name. So, who was Cyrus? Cyrus was the kings of the Medes and the Persians. All right, he's famous as could be, right? Like most people know who Cyrus is. He was the son of Cambyses, and he would have actually been the grandson of Astyages the Mede. So he's mentioned in the book of Daniel, book of Isaiah, Ezra, and 2nd Chronicles. So he's mentioned quite a bit in Scripture. So what is the problems with Cyrus? Okay, so again, let's go to the identity requirements. He was Median. No. So Cyrus was actually Median through his mother, but he never claimed to be a Mede. He only claims to be Persian. So his father, Cambyses, was a Persian. So we have no writings that ever mention Cyrus taking on the title of Median, ever. So it would be weird that he would have taken on that name, Darius the Mede. It just doesn't make sense. He was 62 at the fall of Babylon. He fails this as well. So this is a quote from, again, Roger C. Young. It says, Cyrus appears to have been about 28 years of age when the Persian and Median forces under his command defeat Lydia in 547, which would make him about 36 at the fall of Babylon. So it says, even more, germane is a reference in a contemporaneous document, the dream text of Nabonidus, which was produced by the court of Cyrus, in which Cyrus is called a young servant of Marduk at the time of the fall of Babylon. So that just doesn't add up again. What doesn't add up that he would have been, 62 years old. We have a couple different sources that would have put him probably about the age of 20s to 30s. Other is he ruled between Belshazzar of Babylon and Cyrus the Persian. Well, clearly, no. It says Daniel describes a King Darius in between Belshazzar and Cyrus. So it just wouldn't have made sense in the book of Daniel for Daniel to say in the first year of the reign of Darius and then later on say in the first year of the reign of Cyrus. Why would he call them two different things? They are clearly two different characters. Xenophon in that quote we took of Nabonidus being in Carmania and Cyrus gave him a part of the land. If you remember, what it said was, but Darius took some of the land for himself. So again, Darius was lived at the same time and would have also been a king during the time of Cyrus. And then he lived long enough to partake in the events described in Daniel, the lion's den. He does pass that. So the results would be a 1 out of 4 also fails. So we get to the final theory. So Cyaxares II. So Cyaxares would have been son of Astyages, the king of the Medes. He actually would have been the uncle of Cyrus. And he was ultimately the king of the Medians after Astyages had passed. So, kind of describing the events here. So, Stephen Anderson does a great job in our interview. Again, go back and watch that. Astyages was king of the Medes. So, he gave his daughter, Mandane, to Cambyses, who was a prince in Persia. So Cambyses and Mandane had a son, Cyrus. But Astyages also had other kids, and one of his other sons was named Cyaxares II. So that's who this is. So it would have been Cyrus's uncle. Cyrus would have been from a Persian father and a Median mother. So let's test Cyaxares. So Cyaxares, he was Median. Yes, he was. Absolutely. According to Xenophon, he was actually king of the Medes. He was 62 at the fall of Babylon. Well, if Cyrus was approximately, 28 to 36, and Cyaxares was his uncle, I think the logic stands that he most likely probably would have been the generation older than Cyrus and definitely could have been 62 years old at the fall of Babylon. He ruled between Belshazzar of Babylon and Cyrus the Persian. Passes as well. Xenophon presents Cyaxares as co-regents with Cyrus, and he even presents him as superior to Cyrus. So this is a quote. It says, "Now the night in which Cyrus had marched out, Cyaxares, the king of the Medes," so again, there it is, king of the Medes, this is according to Xenophon, "and his messmates got drunk in celebration of their success. And he supposed that the rest of the Medes were all in the camp except a few, for he had heard a great racket. For inasmuch as their masters had gone off, the servants of the Medes were drinking and carousing without restraint, especially as they had taken from the Assyrian army wine and many other supplies." So it's just this quote about how Cyrus left the camp, and king of the Medes, Cyaxares, was still there, and him and the Medes were getting drunk. And then it says he lived long enough to partake in the events described in Daniel. That's another pass. Cyaxares died approximately in 537, which would have been 2 years after the fall of Babylon in 539. That is enough time for the lion's den. It's enough time to hit those markers of the first year of the reign of Darius. So I think by all accounts, Cyaxares passes with flying colors. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. Darius the Mede was likely Cyaxares II, son of Astyages, king of the Medes. I already mentioned Astyages gave his daughter to the Persian king Cambyses, and their child was Cyrus. Cyaxares is Cyrus's uncle, ruled the kingdom after his father Astyages died. So Cyaxares ultimately served as co-regents with Cyrus, but the Persians were subservient, actually, to the Medes. Cyaxares II ruled in Babylon until his death, and then Cyrus took over the kingdom. So the other large part is that this story that I just gave you, right, using quotes from Xenophon or Berosus and Herodotus, it really conflicts with the story that a lot of secular historians will take as the story of Cyrus. So Cyrus makes this own story of his own fame that he actually went and defeated Astyages, and he conquered the Median Empire. And he would have done that in about 553 to 550. But the problem is we found something called the Haran Stele, which was written in 546, and it speaks of the king of the Medes as an enemy of the Babylonians. So if Cyrus had conquered them in 550, right, then there wouldn't have been a king of the Medes, because if he would have conquered Astyages and took over the kingdom, and there was only Cyrus's kingdom at that point, then it would have been the king of the Persians. But the Haran Stele doesn't mention any king of the Persians. It only mentions the king of the Medes. So if he didn't conquer the Medes, and Cyaxares was the king of the Medes, it would affirm that both the Haran Stele and the account of Xenophon, which mentioned Cyaxares as the king of the Medes after Astyages. And that seems to be the most legitimate answer, is that Cyrus was involved, and this is actually where Dr. Stephen D. Anderson and a lot of his writings come in, is that he expresses that Cyrus was a master of propaganda, that he kind of wrote his own story and claim to fame. There was also a story about how he had this miraculous birth almost, that Astyages, king of the Medes, had this vision of this young, one of his descendants was going to, take over the kingdom. He was going to be a Persian, and he tried to switch out the babies, but it ended up not working, and Cyrus came up and took over the kingdom anyways. So he presents this as like an oracle or a prophecy that Cyrus was this thing sent from God, specifically the god Marduk, to essentially take over the kingdom. And that's how he kind of spun his ruling over to the Babylonians, because they were servants of Marduk. So this actually, the Saigzar's view, it's not a new view. It actually was a popular view and was held by people like Josephus, John Calvin, all the way up to Kyle and Delch. So let's look at Josephus, a quote from him. It says, "But when Babylon was taken by Darius, and when he, with his kinsman Cyrus, had put an end to the dominion of the Babylonians, he was 62 years old. He was the son of Astyages and had another name amongst the Greeks." So right there, Josephus says that Darius was the son of Astyages. Well, we know clearly the son of Astyages was Saigzarys II. And not only that, Josephus even says he had a different name amongst the Greeks. He just doesn't mention what it was, and that is Saigzarys. So Calvin's commentary. So let's look at that. Daniel adds, "The kingdom was transferred to the king of the Medes, whom he calls Darius, but Xenophon terms him Saigzarys. It is clear enough that Babylon was taken by the skill and under the auspices of Cyrus, since he was the persevering warrior possessed of great authority, though he is not mentioned here. But since Xenophon relates that Saigzarys, here called Darius, was Cyrus's father-in-law, and thus held in the highest honor and estimation, it is not surprising to find Daniel bringing that king before us. Cyrus was content with his own power and with the praise and fame of his victory, and readily conceded this title to his father-in-law, whom he perceived to be now growing aged and infirm. It is uncertain whether he was the son of Astyages and thus the uncle of Cyrus. Many historians concur in stating that Astyages was the grandfather of Cyrus, who married his daughter to Cambyses, because the astrologers had informed him how an offspring should be born of her and should possess the sovereignty over all Asia. Many add the story of his ordering the infant Cyrus to be slain, but since the matters are uncertain, I leave them undecided. I rather think Darius was the uncle of Cyrus, and also his father-in-law, though if we believe Xenophon, he was unmarried at the capture of Babylon, for his uncle, and perhaps his father-in-law, had sent him to bring supplies when he was inferior in numbers to the Babylonians and Assyrians. However this may be, the prophet's narrative suits the circumstances well enough, for Darius, as the king of the Medes, obtained the royal authority. Cyrus was indeed higher than he in both rank and majesty, but he granted him the title King of Babylon, and under this name he reigned over the Chaldeans. So that's another thing I forgot to mention. We end up having Saigzarys actually give one of his daughters to Cyrus as a wife, so he also became his father-in-law. But Calvin, pretty much everything I just said, Calvin kind of related. And this one's from Kyle and Delch commentary. Xenophon in the Chiropaedia reports somewhat otherwise regarding Cyrus. According to him, the Median king Astyages, son of Saigzarys I, gave his daughter Mandane in marriage to Cambyses, the Persian king, who was under the Median supremacy, so under the Medes, and that Cyrus was born of this marriage. When Cyrus arrived at man's estate, Astyages died and was succeeded on the Median throne by his son Saigzarys II, the brother of Mandane. Again, so we have a very popular view for a very long time. So Dr. Stephen Anderson goes on to describe that when we started getting cuneiform out people really gravitated towards cuneiform because it's old, right? It's cuneiform. And they kind of got taken down the wrong path. They started, really what they ended up reading is a lot of Cyrus propaganda texts. So for years now, we've been kind of under this assumption that these cuneiform were telling us the true history, whereas it seems that what we found were simply propaganda texts, and actually this older view that Cyaxares II was indeed Darius the Mede seems to actually fit a whole lot better. So, wrapping this all up, so that was a lot. I got it done as quick as I could, so I hope you guys followed along. So, Daniel chapter 5 can be pretty straightforward on the idea of what it's talking about, the actual story, the actual interpretation of the inscription on the wall. Like we said, God has numbered it, God has divided it, and weighed it and found it lacking, right? So the confusion comes in is who was it talking about? Who was Belshazzar? Who was Darius? Right? Who are these characters? Well, it's going to help us as we move forward into the other chapters of Daniel, that now I don't have to tell you who Darius the Mede was when we deal with him, because we dealt with it here. Darius the Mede, for taking all of things together, Darius the Mede was Cyaxares II, king of the Medes, son of Astyages, uncle and father-in-law of Cyrus the Great. That seems to be who it was. Belshazzar was not son of Nebuchadnezzar, but was the son of Nabonidus. We looked at the Uruk Kings list, and that would detail that for us. So I hope you guys followed along. Hope you guys enjoyed this. And I hope to get to work quickly on Daniel chapter 6. As far as I know, it should not take as long as Daniel chapter 5, but who knows? I will get it out as quick as I can. So until next time, God bless.
Seated here at my right hand, the Lord to my Lord did command, for of these heathen I will make a kingly footstool for your sake.